Hello, and welcome to History on Blast, Episode 9, Present but Not Voting. On today's episode, we're going to be putting Jeremy Bentham, philosopher and all-around pretty cool guy, on blast for deciding that he wanted to have his body put on display and continuing to attend meetings on an at least somewhat regular basis 200 years after his death. But first, this month in history. On September 29th in 1829, by Act of Parliament, Greater London's Metropolitan Police Force was founded. This was the first actually government-sanctioned police force in London, as opposed to the smaller private police forces that had existed previously. This Act of Parliament was made at the request of Sir Robert Peel, the Home Secretary, which is where this police force got their nickname, Bobbies. Later, the name was changed to Scotland Yard, which was the site of their first headquarters. Alright, so let's talk about my boy Jeremy Bentham. So, Jeremy, or, JB, was born in London in 1748, and he lived to be a ripe old 84 years old. He believed in a lot of pretty cool things for a dude who was born in the 1700s. He believed in the abolition of slavery. He believed in equal rights for women. He actually advocated for and was the first person to write on the topic of decriminalization of homosexual acts. He was known for believing in equal opportunity in education. He believed in the right to divorce, in freedom of expression, separation of church and state, the abolition of the death penalty. He didn't believe in corporal punishment. He advocated for animal rights. All in all, he was a pretty cool dude. He was actually an 18th century and 19th century philosopher. That's what happens when you straddle those century lines. And he believed in the school of philosophy known as utilitarianism. Among other things, he believed that it is the greatest happiness of the greatest number that is the measure of right and wrong. Which is to say that whenever you're doing anything, you should measure if this is going to make the most people possible happy. It's a very simple philosophy, and it's actually a pretty good one. Through the course of his life, he influenced reform of prisons, schools, various laws, Parliament itself. He was a pretty busy dude. He had friends in the nobility, he had friends in Parliament. He was kind of all over the place. He also believed that people should donate their bodies to science. And he promised that he would. And he did, in fact. That's where things get weird. So, I have here an extract from JB's will, in which, well, this is the part where things start to get a little spooky, let's go with. He decided that what he wanted to do with his body, after, of course, a public dissection by medical students, more like by a doctor in front of a whole bunch of medical students, because it was the 1800s and that's how you do. There was the whole medical theater thing, and that's basically how you learn medicine, is you watch somebody else cut up a corpse. Sure. So, there's a public dissection after which his head is removed and desiccated, which is to say they took all of the liquid out. And they more or less went like stereotypical headhunter on this dude and preserved his head. It ended up getting really leathery and kind of creepy, so they decided not to keep that one. Okay. They decided not to display that one. They did keep it, which has led to some comedy. But first, What they did with the rest, they removed the flesh from his skeleton and then put it in one of his favorite suits, padded it out with hay and cloth, sat him in his favorite armchair in a box, and put him on display. Because that's what he always wanted. I'm not even being facetious, that's like actually in his will. It says here, and I quote, "My body I give to my dear friend, Dr. Southwood Smith, to be disposed of in a manner hereinafter mentioned, and I direct. He will take my body under his charge, and take the requisite and appropriate measures for the disposal and preservation of the several parts of my bodily frame, in the manner expressed in the paper annexed to this will, and at the top of which I have written Otto Icon. The skeleton he will cause to be put together in such a manner as that the whole figure may be seated in a chair, usually occupied by me when living, in the attitude in which I am sitting when engaged in thought in the course of time employed in writing." Yeah, skeleton, in a suit, in a chair, in a box. Now we'll go back to that creepy head. So they had his head, like his real actual head, and they were like, well, this is kind of creepy, and it doesn't really look like him anymore, so we're gonna make a wax one. And then they put him in his creepy box with his wax head, and then they put his real head in another box where you could see it, also on display with the Otto icon, as they called it, of of him. And then his body and this box and this whole thing was given to University College London. And this is where things get even funnier. Because students started stealing Jeremy Bentham's head. Yep, that's right. They started stealing his head. It happened at least once. Possibly twice. Maybe 3 times. Hard to say. The record is a little spotty. My boy JB also had a few other legends made about his body. Specifically, one of them is that his body periodically is brought to meetings of the college council, where it is brought in and recorded in the minutes with the words, "Jeremy Bentham, present, but not voting." The stories also say that sometimes he does vote, but only when the council is equally split, and then he will vote in favor of the motion. To say that he attends every meeting is a myth. That one is definitely not real. However, I was able to find proof that he at the very least attended at least one meeting in 2013. So, that's pretty much the story of my boy Jeremy Bentham. Honestly, he did a lot of good in his life, and then he did a lot of weird in his death, and that's a life you can admire. Do good and do weird. I'm on board. Actually, I'd kind of like that on a t-shirt, which is something that I may think about in the future. As always, thank you for listening. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, then you should leave a review on iTunes. That is one of the best ways to make sure that more people can find the podcast. Also, if you've got any friends who you think might be into it, go ahead and share it. The more listeners, the better. If you've got any feedback you'd like to provide, you can find me at historyonblast@gmail.com or at historyonblast on Twitter. As always, I would like to thank Defy Them All for the use of their song Keeper of Histories for the intro and outro of our program. If you've got any suggestions for episode topics, I am always up for suggestions. You can leave those on Twitter, on email, anything you want. I'm also looking for listener submissions. If you've got any hometown weird history, I'm hoping to do a listener roundup, so if you can submit your stories, that would be fantastic. I'm also hoping, if you're looking for this kind of thing, I'm hoping to be getting the transcripts of all of my episodes up on the website soon. Most of the transcripts are written. I just need to post them, so hopefully they'll be up soon. And as always, thank you.